Hello everyone, welcome to my YouTube channel Java by MK. So I'm back with a new video. So it is, as you can see on screen, that I'm going to cover 50 microservices problems with solution in this video. So it is going to be a quick recap of all the topics that is there in microservices. In the next video I will build a project, but in this video I will just go through all the topics that we are going to cover in microservices. So starting with microservices, what are microservices? Microservices software architecture style that structures an application as a collection of loosely coupled services. Each service is fine grained and performs a single function. So we know that means microservices we will have multiple independent services. Okay, and all these services perform a single function, single work, and these all these services together forms what we call as microservice. So what are the advantages of microservices? So we know that it makes it is more scalable, flexible, improved fault solution, isolation, easier deployment, technology diversity. What are the challenges of microservices? Complexity of management, network latency, data consistency, deployment complexity, monitoring and logging. How do you handle communication between microservices? Very good question. So communication can be handled using RESTful APIs. So we generally use RESTful APIs to communicate between different services in microservice. And gRPC my messaging queues like RabbitMQ, Kafka, or service discovery mechanism. These are other alternatives that we use to handle communication. What is service discovery in microservice? Service discovery is the process of automatically detecting services on the network. Tools like Eureka, Console, and Zookeeper can be used for service discovery. What is API gateway? So API gateway is a server that acts as an API front end, receiving API requests, enforcing throttling and security policies, passing requests to the back end service, and then passing the response back to the requester. So all the APIs are together act in work in a API gateway. Okay, so it is a kind of a gateway from where all the request comes and all the responses goes. How do you implement load balancing in microservices? So load balancing can be implemented using Netflix Ribbon and Nginx HA proxy, or using cloud native services, so like AWS ELB. So we understand what load balancing is, that we can have multiple servers, and based on the load, more number of instances get created, and that's how we balance the upcoming request. If the request is less, uh, means it load balancer will decide where and which server we have to send the request. Okay, like this. So what are the best practices for designing RESTful APIs? So use HTTP method appropriately, get, post, put, delete, use proper status codes, keep URLs simple and intuitive, implement versioning. What is circuit breaker pattern? Circuit breaker pattern is used to detect failures and encapsulate the logic of preventing a failure from constantly recurring during maintenance, temporary external system failure, or let's understand circuit breaker with one example. Suppose you have three services: order service, payment service, and inventory service. Okay, when a user places an order service calls the payment service to process the payment, and inventory service to update stocks. So what will happen without circuit breaker? If the payment service becomes slow or fails, the order service will keep sending requests which will time out or fail. This can cause a backlog of requests, consume resources, and potentially lead to a complete system failure. So instead of keep on sending the request, even knowing that payment service is slow or not working, we will be using circuit breaker. So how circuit breaker will work? Using a circuit breaker, the order service can handle the payment more gracefully. Like for example, suppose first one is closed state. Initially, the circuit breaker is closed and the order service sends request to the payment service. Okay. If the Now next step, if the suppose if the payment service starts failing, the circuit breaker counts the number of failures. After a certain number of failures, for example 5, the circuit breaker trips to the open state. The order service immediately returns a fallback response. Payment service is currently unavailable. Please try again later. This is the fallback response that order service immediately returns without waiting for the payment service to timeout. After a timeout, for example 30 seconds, the circuit breaker enters the half open state. The order service sends few test requests to the payment service. If the test request succeeds, the circuit breaker resets to the closed state and the normal operation resumes. If they fail, the circuit breaker goes back to the open state and the cycle repeats. So this is the way how we understood how circuit breaker works. If we go into implementation, we can understand that his trisk is developed by Netflix, and it works like a circuit breaker. It is a circuit breaker. Okay. So histrisk command is one class, library class, that is used, and we can extend that to take to consider it as a circuit breaker. Now I will make a separate video for circuit breaker, but in let's stick to more number of questions. How to implement circuit breaker in Spring Boot? So I already covered this. Using resilience 4J library, we provide decorator to implement circuit breaker pattern. There is also Histrisk. What is the role of Spring Cloud in microservices? Spring Cloud provides tools for developer to quickly build some of the common patterns in distributed systems: configuration management, service discovery, circuit breaker routing. So these are the systems, common pattern system that Spring Cloud provides, that makes things easy for developers. Okay, what is Spring Boot actuator? We very know this. Spring Boot actuator provides endpoints that helps you monitor and manage your Spring Boot application by exposing operational information about running application. How do you handle distributed tracing in microservices? How do you trace your activities in microservices? So we have tools like Jipkin, Sleuth, Spring Cloud Sleuth, so Jagger. So majorly we use Jipkin to do the loggings in the microservice. How do we generate trace ID like this? We will cover in next video. What is Docker and how does it relate to Microservice? Docker is a platform for developing, shipping, and running application inside container. It helps in microservices by providing consistent environment and simplifying deployment. So Docker is a like it creates an environment where all the dependencies will be there, everything will be there. Because see, you have developed a Spring Boot application. Okay, so you need an environment to run your application. Environment like it should have Java, it should have Maven, it should have all the micros, all the dependencies that you need to download. So everything is there in the Docker. It is like a container. How do you manage configuration in microservices? Configuration can be handled by Spring Cloud Config Server. Okay, so we have a okay, so we will cover rest number of questions in next video. Thank you for watching.